Jags versus Vikings. Going through what y'all need to know to make some money on this bitch. So first thing, the picks real quick. I got the Jags at a point spread of 10-17. The Vikings from 38 to 45. I'll get into that. Um, Spread set at 10.5. Vikings favored, and over under 51. And I feel incredibly strongly about the Vikings minus 10.5. And as well as the Vikings money line, although it's not going to be good value on that. And in terms of the over under, I don't think it's bettable, but I would lean on the other. So yeah, stick around, and I'm gonna tell you why and how. That's how it goes down. So first step, again, I'll mention the weather. I didn't mention it just a second ago because it is at Vikings, so it is in a dome, so no weather. But we got Jags O versus Vikings defense. So first step, we got the offensive line versus the defensive line in terms of run blocking. All right, I'll go through injuries real quick. There's nothing super notable. DJ Chark and Chris Conley, receivers on the Jags, did not play last week, and they're looking to be questionable again this week. I'm not sure. Actually, I'm going to lean. I don't care about Chris Conley, but I'm going to lead towards DJ Chark playing for this, and that's being charitable in the way I see. If he doesn't play, it even gets worse. But I'm going to lead towards him playing on the Vikings D. DJ Wonham probably out. Rookie defenseman on the Vikings. I don't care about that either. So interior offensive line versus defensive line. So this actually, of all the advantages in this game for the Jags, this is probably the most significant one. Vikings have terrible interior defensive line. I guess there's some argument they've been playing better the last little bit here. I wouldn't argue that. I mean, just 2 weeks ago against the Cowboys, they were not good, and that's going to show up here. The Vikings O line, Andrew Norwell, their starting guard, did go on IR 2 weeks ago. And it looks like so last week they rotated in rookie Ben Barch and Tyler Shatley at that other guard spot across from AJ Can. I think it'll still be a rotation, maybe even more heavily towards Barch. He's just, I mean, being a rookie, and I think he's just better leaning into playing younger guys. But yeah, I mean, listen, they're gonna be able to push the Vikings interior. Like I said, the Vikings interior is awful. Jaleel Johnson, Shamar Stephen, neither of whom have business starting, and probably most teams shouldn't be in a defensive tackle rotation even. Um, and AJ Can has a ton of problems, but he has problems with good players. Here, he's actually going to be able to push decently, and Brandon Leonard is a super good center. And he, although not a just common to most centers in general, not a crazy like mover of people at the line of scrimmage, but he's good enough to create space at the line. And that other guard, yeah, Ben Barch, like I said, he's actually he's shown some things. He has some pretty awful losses so far this year in terms of like getting thrown off balance pretty quick. But here they just I cannot exaggerate to you enough how bad the Vikings defensive tackles are. So then on the edges, here though it's quite a bit different. Vikings defensive ends, so they effectively play like run only defenders at defensive end at this point. Jalen Holmes and Ifeadi Adenabo, both of them are they're just run defenders, and they are pretty reasonable at it. They're both disciplined. They're actually both pretty strong, and they both know what they're doing against the run. Now neither of them are like penetrators in the backfield, but they're okay now. And that Jags tackles are actually good run blockers as well. Cam Robinson, it's pretty much the only thing he does well. I actually don't think he's as bad in pass protection as a lot of people think he is, but he's a decent run blocker, and Juwan Taylor too. He's not crazy. He's not like Trent Brown or whatever, but he can move people a little bit. But here, I actually think the edges are going to be more neutral than a real advantage either way, because again, it's kind of a if anything in run defense or the run game, it's kind of a strength versus a strength here. Um, so then the second step, the second level, um, Vikings linebackers. So Eric Kendricks is really good, but he's really good as a pass defender, and he's also good, like pretty good sideline to sideline. He's not actually incredible at that, but he's pretty good and he's disciplined and he can definitely make plays. I don't want to talk shit about him. He's good. And Eric Wilson, who's effectively on the field every down, he is not great, but he is a reasonable player. He's not super unathletic. He doesn't get out of position very much. He's a little bit weak and doesn't stand up or shed blocks stand up two or shed blocks super well, but he's not awful. And the Jags offensive line, they're gonna be able to combo from the interior pretty notably, especially Brandon Linder really good at the second level, and you'll see that in this game. But from the edges, which is kind of maybe more what they rely on, they're not going to go crazy. Like I mentioned, there's going to be some push, and there's going to be flashes of especially Cam Robinson getting there, but there's not a ton there, and their scheme isn't like super helpful to their offense or anything like that in terms of running the ball. But they're okay. Um, so the overall run game for the Jags, I mean, while this game is close, I actually think the Jags are going to be able to run the ball reasonably. I said the same thing last week, and that's what happened. Now the Browns are significantly worse at run defense than the Vikings are, but here, like I said, I think I mean, 3 to 4 yards of pop up the middle. Now, that's not super useful, and that's not going to get you very far down the field, but I do think it's a useful tool in an offense, and it's gonna be here. Just anytime, like I said, with the Vikings, you can kind of run it straight up the middle. But in terms of explosive plays or chunks, it's not a ton. James Robinson does create yards. He's legitimately good, but he is still a little bit slow at the top end. And Eric Kendricks is not a disaster. Like the Vikings defense is not a disaster. And I want to mention here Harrison Smith too, who is a legitimately useful run defender from safety. Not crazy, a little bit older at this point, of course, but still better than good. So then you talk about the pass rush. So I mean, there's nothing. The Vikings pass rush is absolutely awful, and it doesn't get better here. The Jags O line actually reasonably good pass in pass protection, reasonable in pass protection, maybe even a little bit better than that, depending on the matchup, and that includes this one. I mean, you just look at who the Vikings have rushing the passer, and there's no one. Hercules Mataafa, I would probably argue, is their best rusher, and even he is more of like a combo inside outside strength rusher, and he's not the type of player that gives the Jags problem. They're really vulnerable to finesse rushers, speed rushers, guys with a lot of explosion and agility. The Vikings just completely miss that as pass rushers. I mean, you're just looking at it all day in the pocket effectively. So then you talk about the receivers versus the defense, and here I actually I've kind of been through this in my Vikings stuff before, but their corners are actually good. They got so misrepresented by what happened in the beginning of the season when they played a bunch of good passing offenses with no pass rush. And so, I mean, it's impossible to guard good receivers with good quarterbacks over 5+ seconds literally every play. So that their stats look pretty bad, but realistically, I mean, especially at this point now they've gotten over a lot of the rookie mistakes. Cade Ansler, Jeff Gladney, Chris Boyd, the three they play, they're like good. Not like okay, they're good. Chris Boyd a little closer to just okay, but um, they're pretty good here. Now the Jags receiver is also good, but not to the extent that I think they're going to consistently dominate the Vikings. Keelan Cole and DJ Chark both actually fairly similar in terms of the separation they get, which is a good thing. But neither of them are quite super high end receivers like you're going to see on the other side of the ball in this game. They're both good, and DJ Chark does a lot of things that are useful, especially like down the field further and further. But I don't want to super overrate their impact in this game. Like I said, they're going to be open reasonably, but they're not going to go crazy. In the slot, though, I'm a little bit worried. Leslie Chenault done a lot of nice things, but he's. I mentioned this in my last Jag video too. He's kind of similar to like Tyler Boyd in route running. He's way better after the catch. He's not quite as good at route running at this point for sure, but just in terms of not being a super great lateral athlete, he can actually be kind of taken away by good slot corners, which the Vikings have. They moved Jeff Gladney into the slot, so I actually think he's going to be a little bit limited. So there's not going to be great initial receiver separation in this game. Now it's going to be okay. Like I said, the receivers are good, but it's not something I think the Jags can like consistently lean on. So the next step, then we get to the quarterback versus the defense. Mike Glennon. So man, so you saw of course last week that the Jags kept it competitive with the Browns, 2-point loss. But if you watch that game, no, they really weren't. I mean, given they're both NFL teams, right? That's how games get close like that. But I mean, the touchdown, right? So he threw a couple touchdowns. One was not a blown coverage, but it was a long, like a 40 plus yarder to Colin Johnson because the defender played the ball bad at the catch point and fell over, or like made a half-ass tackle and fell over. Which I mean that's cool and all, but if you look at like the read and the decision making on that play, it's fine, but it's not something I like look at and say, oh, like wow, every game he's going to be doing stuff like this. In fact, pretty much the opposite. I think you saw in that game that he still struggles to move the ball, and that was against like a terrible like there was a ton of advantages for the Jags, and for him to really only put up that many points, that's not a good sign because here with the way the Vikings scheme their defense. Like I don't like including coaches in this a ton, but Mike Zimmer is one of them that on the defensive side I think is good enough to figure out what's going on here, and he's going to use the safeties, Harrison Smith and Anthony Harris, a lot in ways that is going to confuse or just limit Mike Glennon. Because like I said, I don't get too into how many points the Jags scored last week. That was the benefits of like turnovers, bad officiating, a lot of dumb stuff. So he's still bad. He's going to limit the offense, especially in terms of moving the ball up and down the field. And he's not someone who contribute like unless they get a bunch of breaks again, which is possible, whatever. But unless they get a bunch of breaks again, he's not gonna do super well. Although I will mention, completely clean pocket, right, which is a little bit different than last week. So theoretically, it's possible that he's okay, just because I do think he passes the threshold of like NFL quarterback, but absolutely not something I'm gonna be counting on. So yeah, the overall pass game. This one is still a little bit hard to guess because you are kind of trying to anticipate things that aren't player interactions, which are by far the vast majority of how you predict stuff and how you do it successfully. But here, because here the player interactions would kind of point me to like a neutral passing game, like it's like decent, not a ton of chunks, but and a lack of movement. But I think there's a chance it gets a lot worse. I don't think there's a chance it's better than that, and I think there's a chance it's a lot worse. Because, like I said, the weapons aren't killers, and the Vikings defense pass line of scrimmage is really good still, especially in pass coverage. And I think there's a chance that they just keep the Jags from moving the ball almost ever in this game. So, and then the red zone, that's where Mike Glennon, again, is really going to show up, having last week, too. He's not good enough to consistently succeed in the red zone. The rushing helps a little bit because they can run the ball some, although it's just harder down there in the red zone. But I think it might be touchdowns might be real tough to come by in this game. So then, and so I have them at a point spread of 10-17, which I actually feel pretty good about. I mean, if you look at how they score over 17, it would have to be with like a defensive touchdown or a kick return touchdown, something stupid like that. So, and even then, that might be what gets them there. So then you have the Vikings offense versus the Jags defense, and goddamn, so this is like as ugly as you can get here in terms of what a matchup looks like going into a game. I mean, listen, with injuries, I'm going to go through first for the Vikings. They might have Ezra Cleveland back, who was a rookie second round pick, was playing guard before he got hurt, and he's good. Um, Otherwise, they're going to start Ben Jones in his place again, who also has been reasonable for maybe a little bit better than that in the last two starts he's made. Still probably no Irv Smith for the Vikings, and Dalvin Cook is dealing with some injury stuff. I'm going to go ahead and assume he plays. I actually do think he matters in this game for as much as a running back can, but I'll kind of get into what it looks like with or without him. I'm just going to assume he plays, though, for now. And then on the Jag side, so Sidney Jones, starting corner, might be back. I'll get into his matchup in a little bit. I'm not positive he's going to play. He didn't play last week, but maybe. And then Kamala Correa and Dakota Allen, two potentially starting linebackers or third linebackers who might play, both unsure of their status. The most important one by far, Devon Hamilton, rookie on the Jags, out probably for the rest of the season. Because, goddamn, that guy, A, really good, B, really would have mattered in this game. And you're going to see that it's without him. I mean, woof. So, yeah, let's get into it then. So, the first step, You got O line versus D line, and this might be the first game. I don't even know what this is going to end up looking like because this is the first game of the whole season, the whole since I can remember. The Vikings are like going to have an advantage on the interior of their offensive line, which is fucking nuts to say. Like that's weird. Like I said, I don't know what it's actually. It might get disgusting because the Jags interior linemen now are Taven Bryan, Doug Costin, and Daniel Ekuale. Ekuale, I'm not positive to say his last name, but Taven Bryan's bad. Or okay, he's not quite bad, but he's nowhere near good enough to matter. Doug Costin is like a good fat guy, okay fat guy, but he can't penetrate. He can't move well. When you talk about the way the Vikings move the ball sideline to sideline, how they run around dudes, I mean, those guys are irrelevant, literally irrelevant. And also, even if they were like relevant how they played, the Vikings line is interior line is just better than them at this point. Even whether it's Cleveland or Ben Jones, between those two, Garrett Bradbury and Dakota Dozier, not huge names obviously, but the Jags are worse. They really are, and they're going to be able to put even if the Vikings just abandoned it and ran straight forward, they're going to be able to push these guys. That's just going to get weird. I'm telling you. Because then on the edges, the Jags at least have a little bit of hope. Dwayne Smoot, Adam Gotsis, actually reasonable edge run defenders. You saw that last week a little bit, keeping the Browns at 27. Although again, the Browns should have had a lot more. They're actually reasonable run defenders. I think they will be a little bit in this game too. But Riley Grief and especially Brian O'Neill are reasonable to better than reasonable edge run blockers, and they're going to be able to control those guys to a point. Like I said, I don't think they're necessarily going to kill them, but if that's just one spot, that's not even a huge concern. And if Caleb Chason gets on the field, like Jags first rounder, he's been awful, like legitimately awful this year, and he cannot stand up to what's going to happen in the run game at all. So you talk about the second level, and again here, I mean Jesus. So Miles Jack is really good, but he's really good at like sniffing out plays and stopping them quickly, and he's really good in pass coverage limiting like tight ends or bigger receivers, that type of thing. He still has a ton of issues to deal with in regards to getting out of position and giving up huge plays. You see it throughout the seasons that he's been on the Jags. And just if you give the other team a bunch of rushing attempts, he's going to get caught multiple times. And Joe Schobert is that, but worse. I mean, you saw when the Browns were like the worst run defense in the NFL last year when he played like every snap. It's because he lacks the athleticism to affect things sideline to sideline. And while he does some okay things again, some things okay, again they're more like pass coverage related or like between the tackle stuff. And both of them, for as okay as they can, or even better than that, they can be in other games. Here they're fucking disasters, like actual disasters. And then I want to mention here too. I mentioned it last week, and it happened. Both Browns running backs had like over 100 yards. The Jaguars safeties are ungodly awful, especially in run defense. Jared Wilson, especially listen, if Andrew Wingard tackles Dalvin Cook in the open field in this game, I don't know what to tell you. Then I fucking give up, I guess, because listen, he's terrible. He's fucking awful, and Dalvin Cook is just in a different stratosphere as an athlete. And I think you're going to see. I mean, I think you're going to see like multiple long touchdowns in this game because of that. So the overall run game again is dominant. This is as extreme as I will ever go with a run game in terms of how I think it affects a game. Because any play to play outside of their defensive ends, and occasionally I'll give like Miles Jack flying in to make a stop in the backfield. They're in terrible shape. Terrible. Like even their corners aren't good in run defense. So they they don't at least have like if DJ Hayden was healthy, at least he's a reasonable run defense slot corner. Nothing. I'm telling you, this is going to get really ugly. Oh man. So then you talk about the receivers, and again, so C.J. Henderson, the Jags' top 10 pick from this last year, is on IR. Sidney Jones might not play, and even if he does, the Vikings receivers are outstanding. They're gonna fucking kill the Jags corners. I mean, listen, I'm a Jaguars fan and a Vikings fan. Actually, crazy enough. So I definitely feel like I'm not on either side of this in terms of bias or anything like that. I just look at this game. I mean, it's just disgusting. Like Adam Thielen and Justin Jefferson, if they're covered to play, again, I'll be shocked. I mean, Trey Herndon struggles with these exact types of receivers all the time. Luke Barku, who started in place of Sidney Jones last week, he actually wasn't the worst thing I've ever seen, but he also wasn't being tested by a running team, which you're going to see here, and he wasn't good enough to matter. And then their slot corner, yeah, I assume it's going to be Josiah Scott. Again, didn't show anything that makes me worried even a little bit about him from the Vikings' offensive perspective. And their safeties suck. So down the field, Adam Thielen and Justin Jefferson are going to have big chances again. Man. So then you talk about the quarterback versus the defense. And you got Kirk Cousins in a dome facing a terrible secondary with no pass rush. It's going to be a fucking bloodbath. With options that are constantly open too. Again, any given play, right? Any given pass play, what is preventing the Vikings from succeeding? What? Almost literally nothing. I mean, it's Miles Jack and Joe Schobert as fucking linebackers. If that's what they're throwing out there to prevent an NFL offense from throwing the ball, I'm sorry. It's just or I don't know, Adam Thielen dropping the ball because he does that goofy sometimes. Nah, it's just not going to happen. So you talk about again, yeah, the overall pass game, if they need to, is going to be fantastic. I don't think they're necessarily, they might have 10 throwing attempts in this game, like we've seen them do other times. But whenever they do throw, they're going to be dominant at it again. I'm not going to go quite that far. Actually, Kirk's not good enough to be dominant, but they're going to be really, really good, and the receivers are just always going to be open. And then the red zone too, all that stuff applies. And so I end up with a point spread of 38-45. And frankly, if they cover the spread by themselves, maybe I'd be shocked just because that's so many points. But like, this is for like a non Hall of Fame quarterback versus the defenses. I think this is as big of a mismatch as you can possibly get. So yeah, again, Vikings minus 10.5. I feel incredibly good about because I mean, even if there is, like I said, like what you've seen that last two Jags game where they've actually covered large spreads. One of those was in a fucking hell weather game versus the Packers where they got a kick return touchdown and basically fumble recovered for a touchdown and like Devontae Adams fumbled at the 15 or something. And then versus the Browns, you saw, I mean, I told you they were going to be able to move the ball, which they did, versus a terrible defense with no Myles Garrett. And they only covered in the end because of bad refereeing. Like, it's just awful. And the Vikings, there's just nothing stopping them from succeeding on offense. Like, at any point. So, yeah. Vikings might have Vikings money line too. I don't think you can get high enough odds because they're not going to put anything like a Chiefs Jet like the Chiefs Jets game. If it's not that, then it's still probably positive. And as far as the over under though, that one I'm not going to commit to on necessarily either side. I'm going to lean on the under, but that's more of a bet on Mike Zimmer, like really shutting down the Jags offense, which I'm not going to guarantee because I do think that, like I said, the Jags, while it's close, can run the ball and the receivers are good enough to maybe make some plays, but I'd still lean the under. But like, it's not bettable. But yeah, so Vikings minus 10.5 is you don't get a bigger mismatch in the NFL than this.